This panel is science fiction and in California. And I want to preface this by saying I know we're sort of various places around the state, but I hope you're all keeping safe. Friends and loved ones are safe. There's lots of scary climate stuff, fires happening right now. So extra special thanks for joining us today. So I'm going to start again by introducing everyone, and then we can go straight into the questions, leaving 10 minutes or so at the end for audience Q&A. So attendees, there are a lot of you. It's amazing to see. Please, as we talk, drop your questions in the chat and the Q&A, and we'll ask our panelists those at the end. So starting to my left, we have Eboni J. Dunbar. Eboni is a queer Black woman who writes queer and Black speculative fiction. She lives in Northern California with her wife. She received her BA from Macalester College in English and her MFA in creative writing from Mills College. Eboni is a Vona alum and the former managing editor for the Hugo Award-winning Fire Literary magazine. She is also the winner of the Lambda Literary 2013 Randall Keenan Prize for Black LGBTQ Fiction and the Ignite Award 2024 for the Outstanding Novelette for Spell for Grief and Longing, Fire issue 26. Her work can be found in Stellium Literary Magazine, Fire Magazine of Black Speculative Fiction, Drabblecast, Anathema, Spec from the Margins, Nightlight Podcast, and Beneath Ceaseless Skies. She also has a novella, A Stone and Steel, out from Neon Hemlock Press. Welcome, Eboni. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
And needless to say, I will be dropping links to books, websites as we talk about them. So yeah, if you see links popping up, please do check them out, save them, and you can find our wonderful panelists' work there. Next in my little window of stars is Izzy Wasserstein. Izzy is a queer and trans woman, an assistant professor of English at CSU San Bernardino. She is the author of 2 poetry collections, the short story collection All the Hometowns You Can't Stay Away From, which was a Lambda Literary Award finalist, and the novella These Fragile Graces, This Fugitive Heart, published by Tachyon in 2024. She lives in Southern California, where she shares a home with the writer Nora E. Darrington and their animal companions. Hey, Izzy, great to see you. Next up, we have Brent Lambert. Brent is a Black queer man who heavily believes in the transformative power of speculative fiction across media formats. As a founding member of Fire Literary magazine, he turned that belief into action and became part of a Hugo Award-winning team. Currently, he has a novella, A Necessary Chaos, out from Neon Hemlock, and is part of the Black horror anthology All These Sunken Souls. He also recently was in the exceptionally gay anthology I Want That Twink Obliterated, which is amazing. Please check that out. I'll be dropping the link in the chat forthwith, and ask him his favorite members of the X-Men, and you'll get different answers every time. Thank you, Brett. Great to see you. Thanks for joining us.
You too. Yeah, happy to be here.
And last but certainly not least, Charlie Jane Anders. Charlie Jane is the author of Lessons in Magic and Disaster, coming August 2025 from Tor Books. Mark your calendars. Her other novels include All the Birds in the Sky, The City in the Middle of the Night, and the young adult Unstoppable trilogy. She is also the author of the short story collection Even Greater Mistakes and Never Say You Can't Survive, a book about how to use creative writing to get through hard times. She's won the Hugo, Nebula, Sturgeon, Lambda Literary, Crawford, and Locus Awards. She co-created Escapade, a transgender superhero for Marvel Comics, and wrote her into the long-running New Mutants comic. And she's currently the host, currently the science fiction and fantasy book reviewer for the Washington Post. And with Annalee Newitz, she co-hosts the podcast Our Opinions Are Correct. So thank you, Charlie Jane. Thank you all. I am very, very excited to speak to you all.
Thanks for having us.
Of course, it's a complete pleasure. And I'll start with the first question that I posed to everyone before the panel. So, how has California or your geographical location in general influenced your work? And anyone can start. I can pick on someone if need be. Have at it.
I guess I could start on this one.
Sure.
So I guess the easiest answer for me in my career is that it created a necessary distance for me, because I am from the South, so that's where all my family heritage is. I'm Creole, my family 8 generations back, Louisiana type deal. So, but I wasn't particularly happy with where I was living in the South at the time. And almost over 10 years ago now, I moved from Georgia to California. And I think having a place where I didn't know anyone kind of made me go into a creative cocoon, I guess, because I didn't know anyone and all I had was myself and my thoughts. And I finally had the time to really create and to really find out what I wanted to create and how I wanted to create. And something about the perpetual summer of San Diego also, I don't know, it kind of gave me this energy and like this kind of, I don't know, kind of like felt like it increased my life force a little bit to put myself out there and to give things a chance, because everything out here, especially when I first moved out here, it all felt fresh and new and exciting. And, so I was willing to take those chances on things. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I'm from the East Coast. I'm actually from New England. My parents were both college professors in Connecticut, in like rural Connecticut. And I feel like it was really uptight there. It was really kind of like there was a lot of old stuff. There was a lot of like tradition and a lot of like, just random prestige floating around. And coming out west was really liberating in a lot of ways, and particularly coming to San Francisco. Like I feel like San Francisco is a place where a lot of people come to start over. It's a place where, it's always been kind of a boom and bust town. It's always been a place where like people are trying wild schemes and like, I'm living in a city where you can walk down the street and there's like people hanging out on the sidewalk naked, like not too far from my house. And like, it's very different from New England. I mean, it's too cold in New England to a lot of the time to be naked outside. But also, just I think you might get in trouble if you tried that even in the more liberal parts of New England. And like, I don't know, like when I first moved to San Francisco, I had to learn about flirting. Like I didn't know about flirting. I didn't understand what flirting was. I actually wrote a short story about this back then. I thought that if someone was flirting with me, that meant that they were romantically interested in me, or that they wanted to hook up, or that there was something that was going to happen. And it took me like a while after moving to California to realize that people just flirt. People just flirt, and it doesn't necessarily mean anything. And it can actually be nice once you stop trying to think that it means something. If somebody's like, hey, I like your outfit or whatever, as long as they're not being creepy about it, as long as they're just being friendly. And there's ways to do it that are creepy for sure, but there's also ways that are not creepy, I think. And like that was the thing that I learned. And like I feel like that was the difference when I moved to California, is that people flirt here.
Love that and can confirm. Thanks for sharing. Izzy or Ebony, feel free to jump in.
Sure, I can jump in. Yeah, so I'm newish to California. I've only been here about 18 months. Came from Kansas, so that's been a big change. Um, and like, so I think the truth is I don't yet know how California is going to influence my work. I'm sure it will, because the few times in my life where I have relocated, that has made a big effect on my work, right? Like when I left Kansas for grad school originally, I was like, I'm never going to write about Kansas. I have no desire to. And within like 2 months, I was, right? So go figure. The But I think I have a propensity for places that are open, and like open to the sky in particular. That's the every time I've been like visiting my folks who now live on the East Coast, I'm kind of, I feel a little oppressed by like the forests everywhere sort of closing in over you. I like to be able to see the sky. But beyond that, I think the thing that most stands out to me about wherever I've lived is that I have ended up with a propensity for places that people disrespect, right? So my hometown is Topeka, Kansas, which is most famous / infamous for being the home of the famously bigoted Westboro Baptist Church. And, there's a lot of self-hatred in the community for that and other reasons. And when I was considering taking this job at San Bernardino, I was talking to some friends who live in Southern California, and their comment was, the Inland Empire is a dump. That was the entirety of their analysis. And what that had the effect on me of immediately making me like, oh, I think I'm going to like the Inland Empire. I actually kind of already knew I would for other reasons, but like the idea, I could feel in it like the snobbishness of like, you know, people who can afford to live closer to LA. It's also like there's millions of people in the Inland Empire. It's a lot of people to just sort of dismiss their entire thing out of hand. And I think like the stories of places that aren't taken seriously or that aren't often written about at all, and of places and people who aren't like centrally located to power are really interesting to me, and I think keep shaping my work.
Amazing, thank you.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I love that I get to be the only native Californian on this call. Born and raised in the Bay Area. I went to undergrad in Minnesota and then came back. And I now live truly in the North. Everybody thinks the Bay Area is the North. It is not. Northern California, friends. That's in the middle. So I live now up near Chico area. So I have truly seen a wide expanse of what California is. And I love it because it's so many different things depending on where you are. San Francisco is absolutely nothing like LA, is absolutely nothing like San Diego, is absolutely nothing like Sacramento. Depending on where you are, you're going to interact with fully different human beings with wildly different views. It was a culture shock to me to move up to where I am right now, because everybody believes way different things than I do. But that's like the joy and the sometimes frustration of California is it can be whatever you want it to be. I think that makes it the perfect backdrop for any story that you want. And when I think about my own writing, and even like I tend to write more fantasy than science fiction, but when I imagine new worlds, I often start from places I have been in California. I have been to the desert in California. I've been in the woods. I've been, I've experienced snow here. So like you can get a little bit of everything in terms of setting and a little bit of everything in terms of people as well. And like that's a great, for me at least, a great starting point. You don't have to go that far to experience something different that might give you a different viewpoint for your work. And I really appreciate that. I also think it's probably one of the few places where you get a transplant from just about everywhere in the country, just about everywhere in the world. If you want to know about something or meet someone from a different community, California is a great place to do it. And you can do it from just about anywhere in the state as well, because people end up in wild places for whatever reason, but they do. We've got a lot of space. It doesn't always feel that way, depending on the city you're in, but there is a ton of space here and a lot of opportunity to meet new people and to pull that into story.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you know, even just hearing from where you all have moved from, and I'm from Cyprus, for goodness sake, which is like if you were to take the globe and point to Riverside, California, and go the complete other, you know, side of the globe, you'd find Cyprus. So I love that. And a related question is actually number 3 that in the order I've sent you. But how do you go about finding your people if you have moved, or even if you haven't moved, you know, you grow with the place, right? How have you found your people, your writing community, your inspiration in your careers? And again, anybody can start with that.
I can kick us off on this one. I think this is an interesting thing because when I saw this question, I was like, oh, my California community. Fascinating, because I don't know that I have been that deeply involved in the SFF community here, despite being like very proximate to San Francisco, where I know that there's a big community, or even in Oakland, there's a big community as well. I have always tended to be such a homebody, and like so much of building community is being online, right? Like I think of Brent as a dear friend. Brent and I have been in person together for like 10 minutes, maybe 4 years ago, but that doesn't matter. That's the part of the community I have built is mostly online. And I have appreciated that. Now I have some people who I think of as my like local humans, and most of those people I have met through classes nearby or through like bookstore events. I just met Annalise Sabrana, who moved recently to Davis. She's the author of Lore of the Wild and Lore of the Tides, which is coming out soon. And that I was like, oh, this is so exciting. There's somebody who's like closest to me and I'm new in this area. So maybe I'll have another person who's in person and can build community that way. But I think California is an interesting place to build community because if you are open to going outside, there you can absolutely find people that will be there and be in community with you. And it's so easy to be in community with people who are not near you at all, right? Like San Diego, San Francisco, Los Angeles, all across the place. There just is an easier way to get involved in community when you're online than when you're in person, but there are lots of opportunities. I don't know, I think of California as a pretty bookish place, despite the fact that it's like well known for being Hollywood and film and all of that stuff. Like you can find people who are really invested in bookish community.
Definitely.
Yeah, I struggle with this one. I think because uh, I feel very strongly that I didn't find my people when I entered the SFF community. They found me, right? Like, um, I mean, as we know, this community has its flaws. It has its bad actors, like every community does, but it also has a lot of really amazing people who approached me when I was sort of entering the field in a really welcoming way, right? Like among those people are Charlie Jane, right? The I don't know if you know this Charlie Jane, but like the first time we met, I was so anxious because I was just like, oh, I admire Charlie Jane so much. I don't even know, but made me feel super welcome. R.B. Limberg and Bogey Takash, Andy Duncan, Sarah Pinsker, lots and lots of people, many names I'm leaving out. Just and the and I had come from, I'm in academia and I'd come from poetry writing where, at least in my experience, there's a lot less of that welcoming in. There's a lot it just it did not have nearly as welcoming a vibe. And so, what happened very quickly was that people just were like, hey, be welcome, not like that thing of like, oh, I'm not going to talk to you because you're not a big deal, right? That you're, a new career writer or whatever. And so, I have tried in finding the way I guess I think about finding people now is about trying to welcome people in the way I was welcomed in as much as I can, right? So, like, if there's somebody I know a little bit at a conference and we're a bunch of us are going out to dinner and I see them like looking like they don't know what they're going to do with themselves, right? And I try to include folks as best I can. Although, earlier today, in at least one of the panels, people were talking about how things are changing as in-person conferences become much less central to the genre. And there are some real advantages to that change. But one big disadvantage is like a lot of my friends in the genre I have met or strengthened our friendship through those conferences. And over Zoom, it's not the same. So I don't quite know what that's going to look like in the future.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I actually did a thread a while ago on Blue Sky about like if you're lonely, you should volunteer for stuff, like volunteering for stuff and like getting involved with publications, like the way Brent helped start FIA. That's incredible. And yeah, I mean, for me, like, okay, I moved to the Bay Area. I've told this story before, so I apologize if you've heard it, but I moved to the Bay Area and immediately I just started volunteering for things. And I joined the staff of this magazine called Anything That Moves, that was like a bisexual magazine, which it used to be famous. It was in every bookstore and magazine store and record store all over the country. It was like tens of thousands of stores had this magazine. It was like a magazine for bisexuals. And I wrote a bunch of stuff for them, but I also helped to edit it. I got involved with like this other local publisher of erotica and queer stuff. They were having parties. The way I found them is that they had a monthly, or maybe it wasn't monthly, maybe it was like every other month, a spoken word erotica event called Perverts Put Out that still happens occasionally. And I just showed up at that and was like, how can I get involved with these people? This is amazing. And then they were like, well, we really need help with the publishing company that this is raising money for. And so I became a slush reader anymore. Do not read Erotica Slush. It is terrifying. It is terrifying. The stuff that doesn't get published is just, you can't even imagine. It's just terrible. But just like a ton of stuff like that, like there's a ton of like queer organizations, queer like tiny publishing ventures, tiny little like entities that nobody remembers anymore, which I got involved with. And the people who helped to run those are still friends of mine in most cases. One or two of them are no longer with us, but in general, they're still friends of mine. I still see them all the time. And, you know, that's how I started to make connections with other writers, is by just working the door. I worked the door at so many events. Just like when you work the door, you meet everybody who's showing up for an event and you talk to them for 30 seconds each. And like you get to know their faces, and eventually you know who they are and they know who you are because they've seen you at the door. And, you know, just working the door and like helping you put out chairs and just like stuff like that. And like that's how I kind of got in. And yeah, just getting involved in stuff, not sitting on the sidelines, not just being like, I hope somebody will notice me, but just like getting in there and doing stuff.
Great advice. Thank you.
So, being in San Diego, I kind of live in this unique epicenter of events that happen that kind of are focused around genre. So, and it makes sense. I guess my answer to this is that like my book community is very transient here, because I get to see a lot of them at certain times of the year, and then they all, you know, go home after the weekend. And what I mean is that I guess the way I started building this is just like showing up to events. So we have a very famous bookstore here in San Diego, Mysterious Galaxy. A lot of authors come and they do book signings. You know, I've hosted conversations with authors and so on and so forth. And actually, so it's a funny story. When I was very first like trying to, I don't know, find my way in the industry, I came to a book signing at Mysterious Galaxy, and I don't remember the author, but it was a popular one, and there was a lot of people there. And so I didn't know anyone. I just took a seat. And Liz Huerta, she's an author here in San Diego. She comes to me, she sits by me, she was like, "You're the only other person of color in here, so I'm sitting by you." And, and so we became friends, you know, because of that. And I think that particular story, I think that's kind of, I saw something online the other day that's saying like friendship is rude. And what you mean by that is that you have to interrupt people, you have to engage people, you have to be willing to kind of like step into their space if you want to build that friendship and you want to build, you know, build that community. And I don't think they mean rude and like, you know, actually being rude, but I think what they meant by that was that it requires you to step outside of your comfort zone and to connect with people. And so that example kind of led me into trying to be of service to people. So like Clarion happens here, right? And a lot of times these instructors, they don't have any transportation. They are desperate to get off campus. I'll send them a message. I'm like, "Hey, I'll come swing by and pick you up. We can go grab something to eat." Or, you know, I remember one year, me and Sam Miller, I took him out to the neighborhood out here, and we just, you know, had a good time. And it was like, you know, doing things like that, just thinking about and doing it from a genuine place too. I always try to preface it with that, because I think sometimes people hear things like that and it's like, "Oh, well, let me, you know, be useful." If it doesn't feel genuine, it doesn't feel like you want to do it, then don't do it. So, and also we have Comic-Con here, which is huge. And actually, that's how I met Charlie Jane. I think I was going to pick up my badge and you were right in front of me. And I was like, "I think that's Charlie Jane. I'm just gonna risk it. I'm gonna go for it." And you know, and so yeah, so I guess my answer to that is that I don't necessarily I have a few. Now I'm starting to have a few writers that I'm figuring out actually live here and don't just come for like, you know, major book events. But most of the people that I hang out with, you know, I look forward to July when everyone flies in for Comic-Con weekend. So
Can I add one more thing on Brent's point about being rude, which is that I think it also community takes a lot of work. I think sometimes we expect like, "Oh, I'll just come and I'll go to this event and magically I will then have community and I don't have to do anything and like the people will embrace me." And sometimes you actually do have to be the one who's like, "Oh, I said hello to Charlie Jane at that event. maybe I need to follow up. They're not going to come back to me and say, oh, I was thinking about you. You have to be the one who's putting out that little bit of extra effort. And maybe that's part of the rudeness, is like, you do have to be the person who's like, hi, I may feel like a burden to you right now, but I just came to say hello and I wanted to say hello again, or we've chatted not that long ago. It is a little bit of work to build that community, and it's going to feel uncomfortable, but eventually, if you do it right, eventually that discomfort will fall away and it'll start to feel more natural and a little less like work, and a little bit more like, oh, I'm just hanging out with my friend. This is just my homie that I usually am texting with. This is the same thing. They just happen to be really famous and award winning, and isn't that amazing?
Yeah, if I can, I'd like to follow that up as well and say that not only do I strongly agree with those points, like, but it's also a real kindness often to that person. Like, um, as somebody who has a lot of trouble connecting names to faces in my brain, the when someone comes up to me and like uh, includes me, that really helps, right? Like, I know, for example, Brent, that the first time that we met in person, like my brain did not interpret that as you to me, even in the slightest. And I was like, I still don't know what exactly why are you going on, but like, so I feel like it's easy to feel like that is being the bad kind of rude, right? But most of the time, people are delighted to like have somebody to talk to, right? Like I've never been sitting by myself in a public area at a con or whatever at a reading and been like, what I really want is to have no one to discuss this with.
Yeah, and I think you have to. I always try to tell myself this on that point is like we, for the most part, we only see each other as like one picture online most of the time. So we have no idea what that looks like in a 3D setting. And like, I often think like, oh my God, they're so much taller, or oh, they're shorter, or like, oh, wait, that wasn't quite what I was thinking. But and so you have to kind of like readjust when you get into that into the 3D space with people. So for me, I don't ever mind like telling someone like, oh, I'm Brent, because I recognize like you've only seen like this portion of me from a picture 2 years ago that's been sitting on my profile. So yeah.
Yeah, I have the face blindness really bad. I have a hard time connecting names and faces, especially if I've only seen someone online. But even if I've seen someone in person before, it's really bad. The other day, I ran into someone who I had known in like this Star Trek thing that we went to, this Star Trek gathering, and then they were at like a queer leather event, and I was like, I just did not know who they were because I just had them filed in like this one place and they were like in this other, and I was like, you're in the wrong place. I don't know who you are. I was just like, yes, I'm allowed to be more than one dimensional, actually. But yeah, I feel like for people in the sci-fi fantasy kind of writer world, social awkwardness is probably more of a thing than in some other spaces. I'm just gonna say, I think a lot of us are a little bit, have unusual ways of interacting, and I certainly have a lot of anxiety about just talking to people, and and I just try to make up for that by being as silly as possible, because then I just, um, I feel like if I say something wrong, it'll just be part of the silly stuff I'm saying. I don't know. It doesn't really work. But yeah, I have a lot of awkwardness and anxiety about interacting with people. But I know that other people do too. So I just kind of be like, okay, we're all being awkward together, and it's okay. Which feels very Californian to me for some reason. I don't know why.
I agree. And it's interesting hearing you all talk about that difference between the physical space versus the virtual space. And, I always think for myself, like I always just think in all contexts, keep it short, keep it cute. If I don't know the person very well, drop them a quick email. I'm a fan, loved your work, love it, whatever, and then just peace out. And then if they want to continue the conversation, they can. Same in person. If I'm meeting someone for the first time, keep it short, keep it cute, get in, get out. Maybe, but there are different ways of navigating these spaces, right? And it takes time, as we said in the last panel, it can take time to see the same faces, and hear from folks in the field to build these relationships. I'm going to actually add a question based on something that you were saying about landscapes. So Izzy, you mentioned the the open sky of Kansas. And Brent, you were mentioning the perpetual heat. If we could pivot to maybe a bit of craft, a bit of world building, how do you use, or not, your physical surroundings? And I know Eboni, you mentioned this too, in your own work, in your craft. Do you look outside your window? Do you look on, do you look online? How does physical location play into your world building?
I'll just jump in really fast and say that California feels like a very apocalyptic place now. Like, if you're writing about like near future apocalyptic scenarios, you just literally have to look out your window in California lately. Especially, I feel so horrible for everybody in SoCal right now, and my heart goes out to anybody in the LA area. Was just spent the morning checking in with my friends about like, are you okay? Do you need anything? Like, I just texted like a dozen people to make sure that nobody has been burned out of their home or whatever. So far, so good. I mean, just on that note, like when I wrote All the Birds in the Sky, I wrote it the first draft in like 2011, 2012, and I wrote a lot of stuff about like they're in San Francisco, it's rainy and cold. And then I was like, oh, but this takes place in the near future. It should be hot. And so I changed it to like, oh, it was a really hot day. And by the time the book came out in 2014, it was already really hot here most of the time. So the book would have felt like from the past if I hadn't changed it to be more futuristic.
Go ahead, Brent.
I guess for me, it just kind of living here kind of has helped me understand like how swiftly a landscape can change. Because so I think a lot of people who don't live in California don't actually realize like how diverse it is. So I will often get calls from family members when an unfortunate event happens in like the Bay Area. They're like, "Oh, are you okay?" I'm like, "That is so far away from me. It will never touch me." And so I had to kind of give them the context from it. I'm like, San Diego to that area would be like you calling me from Atlanta about something that happened in Miami. I was like, I was like, so if you're calling me about Miami news, and then I think when I put it that way, people are like, wow, that place is huge. I'm like, yes, it's quite big, but also the landscapes change so swiftly. The fact that like, I mean, if you're willing to make the trek, you can go snowboarding in the morning in Big Bear, and you can be at the beach in LA in the same day. So for me, at least, it gives the context of like it. If someone put that in a book, you probably might be like, that doesn't feel realistic, but but it actually very much happens, and So for me, I guess it kind of allows me to have a little more freedom in doing what seems like improbable things in the geography, because that it's actually not that improbable. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Ebony, you were saying earlier about like using real places as a starting point for alien worlds. And a few weeks ago, we were out at Joshua Tree stargazing. And if you've ever been out, like that's one of the places on Earth that feels to me most alien, right? Like especially that moment when it's not yet fully dark, but the sun is down and it's just like the Joshua trees like sprouting out of this barren landscape. It's great. And so like sometimes like it's just that. Like sometimes I have drawn like I've published work that just draws from my experience in like Flint Hills of Kansas, places like that. But I think that, a lot of what I do craft-wise with place is really about entertaining myself in the drafting process, right? So like I have a short story that takes place in a neighborhood I used to live in, and um, like I played around with the street names, even though like no one but me and like two other people who know me would catch that ever. But just like the combination of like wanting to be true to the experience while also being like, but also not letting that stand in the way of the story, right? So like if I needed to rearrange the blocks a little bit to make the story work, um, hopefully if the vibes are impeccable enough, hopefully readers will, any reader who's paying close enough attention to note the geographical oddities will, I mean, if nothing else, that's like a kind of honor in and of itself, right? For someone to care enough about your work to be like, wait a second, that doesn't take place. That doesn't make sense geographically.
Yeah, like I said, I think I take a lot of inspiration from the random places I have been in California. My wife and I, many years ago now, went to this little place called Borrego Springs, which is the desert. It's like in the very center of in between San Diego and LA. We drove down, so it means I have seen all kinds of different worlds. But when we got there, it's amazing because it is one of those like true dark places at night. And so like even just like thinking about horrific things and like the kind of fear you have when you are in the true pitch black dark, and the sky is beautiful because you can see every star there because there's no light pollution. But it's also terrifying because what's around that corner? Is there a corner there? I actually don't know. I can't tell. And I'm a little bit scared. What's making a noise? How close is the thing that's making a noise? I don't know. And that experience has been a lot of the like, ooh, I can mine this from that or that from that. What is the feeling that's coming across here? I think there are just so many places. Same thing with like Tahoe, which is used to be 4 hours from me in the Bay, and now I'm like 2 hours from it. And somehow Tahoe has snow and I don't have snow. And why is that? What's making that happen? It's beautiful. It's very cold. And what's the difference? And what is that experience like to cross over the threshold? I feel like I don't see enough of like this is California in folks' work at SFF, and I really wish I saw more of it. Like California is the perfect backdrop for a lot of stuff to happen, because you can have just about anything happen and it not affect anyone else in California. Something that happens in San Diego right now is not going to affect me where I am in Northern California. I may never know, maybe hours. That recent earthquake that happened where folks were getting tsunami warnings, and I was getting these warnings, and I was like, the ocean's not going to bother me. I'm all the way on the other side. I can't be affected by the ocean. And that's the wild thing about California, is it can be a space where you can have all of the things happening and the person who's there not be affected by it, but know that it's happening in the backdrop, which is just, I think, really exciting and a really cool way to get to play with the way your world comes together.
That's fascinating. Again, I hadn't, because I've kind of experienced a bit of that with my family, text, are you okay with this? And I'm like, yes, they think I'm in Beverly Hills selling sunset. And I'm like, I'm a librarian in Riverside. Like it's glamorous, but it's not that glamorous. But it's fascinating hearing you draw attention to the sort of not just the physical distance in places within California, but like you mentioned, the climatic differences, the environmental differences. And putting yourself, Eboni, in that physical space and sort of transcribing that experience must be such a profound experience. So thank you for sharing that insight. A novel that you all made me think of is Light from Uncommon Stars by Rika Aoki. Very, very SoCal. And I've only lived here 2 years, but even in those 2 years reading this novel, I was like, oh, the vibes are impeccable, like you mentioned, Izzy, like just the vibes in that book. And so I guess the magic is, as authors, you finding that and being able to infuse your work in that when you want to. And I want to ask you all to sort of talk about or plug a project about which you're most proud. This can be a publication, but it can also be an event you've done or initiative you've been a part of. If you could pick one thing that has recently sort of brought a lot of joy to you or you're most proud of, please do speak on that.
Well, since you mentioned it, I am pretty happy with the story, and I want that twink obliterated, which, by the way, I don't think I'll ever be able to top that title. Like, I think that is probably the peak of titles in my career, and I'm happy it's happening so early. But yeah, no, that anthology was I'm actually reading through it now myself, just because I'm one of those people. If I'm in an anthology, I want to like kind of actually read everyone around it. So yeah, I'm actually particularly proud of being part of that work, and for it being that press's very first collection. I think they did a really great job with it, and yeah, and I'm just happy that we're in a space where we get to tell these kinds of stories about being part of this community and getting to tell stories that and I say this to not discredit those stories, but stories that aren't necessarily wrapped in tragedy. And you know, we get to see hopey, fun, in your face, kind of zany stories that, like, you know, play with these things. Like the idea that we have a mega hit show across the world about drag queens is something I never could have imagined as a child. Like that to me felt like if someone had came to 9-year-old me and told me that would be a thing, I would assume that that there was a mental illness there and I needed to go get my mom. But you know, so that like, so we're in such a good space, and I'm proud to, like, in my own little tiny water drop way, to be contributing to that. I feel like just this tsunami of really good overall queer stories that are like coming out of, I mean, from everyone here. I think we're all contributing to this, like, this groundswell of really interesting, powerful, varied content. So yeah, that would be.
Yeah, there was a great launch party, I think, at Worldcon in Glasgow that just happened in August. And I've dropped the link in the chat to folks who want to check out the anthology. It's amazing. And again, stacked TOC, table of contents. So thanks for that. Thanks for shouting that out, Brent.
Yeah, you know, I just very quickly I'll say that along those same lines, I'm really proud to be in Neon Hemlock's Embodied Exegesis anthology. I just think it's really excellent. And as I was reading through it, I was just like, wow, it just feels great just to share these pages. But I think, especially for this, what we've been talking about, um, my debut novella came out in 2024, These Fragile Graces, This Fugitive Heart. I've got right here behind me. It's always kind of nearby. And, you know, like, for better or for worse, I feel like my brand as a fiction writer is I write about queer communities responding to crisis and authoritarianism and climate change, stuff like that. Um, and in that sense, that the book is sort of like encapsulates what I've been driven to write about and engage with. Um, it also has, like, you know, it's deeply indebted to the noir tradition, and I really loved setting a book, you know, speaking of place, right? I loved setting a book in Kansas City, which in my mind is a very noir city, but is not one that gets coverage, like gets thought of that way, or if it gets thought of at all, right? And so I really think that was great, and also just frankly, right, like it allowed me to take some big swings, and I'm still kind of stunned that, like, it's out in the world, and right, that the stuff that I was sort of most driven to, like the questions about how you can organize a community when you don't have like hierarchical systems of power, is just really important to me, and so it's been really lovely to have that out in the world.
Link also in the chat.
It's hard to choose my favorite child. And I guess I'll do it for you all. I think the truth is I'm proud of every single thing that I write, and whether it's published or not, because it exists, and that in and of itself is pretty incredible. That, like, hey, this thing is done, and somebody finished it. I don't know who that was. It wasn't me. But that, like, is something I get to be proud of. I think of the things that I have published, I'm really proud of A Sin for Freedom, which came out last year. Not last year, that's 2024. Wow. Hi, 2025. 2023, from Beneath Ceaseless Skies. And I really love that story because it is about choosing love and choosing yourself, as opposed to choosing religion or family or anything else that tells you, like, hey, you don't get to be yourself, you have to be what I want you to be. And I think I have had that experience. I think lots of queer people have had that experience. And so, like, that is one of my favorite stories, because I think it is such a, like, breakout moment. It's very much in my vibe of, like, a little bit of queer romance, very brown, and we're just overthrowing people. I like to overthrow people. So it's one of my favorite little things.
Okay, I'm going to plug two things really quickly. First of all, a local California community thing I'm helping to organize this Saturday. If you are in the Bay Area or if you are passing through the Bay Area, we are doing an emergency bookstore and chocolate crawl, which is a thing that we do every once in a while where we get as many people as possible to visit a ton of bookstores, buy books, and then between bookstores we eat chocolate. We'll also stop at a chocolate shop. And there's two bookstores that got really badly flooded recently. When you mentioned the tsunamis, that was around that same time. Two bookstores, Medicine for Nightmares and Adobe, got really badly flooded. Another bookstore, Eastway Booksellers, burnt down and just reopened in a new space. So we are doing a little thing where we're going to get as many people as possible to visit those bookstores and support them. And second of all, my novel, Lessons in Magic and Disaster, comes out in August, like Phoenix mentioned at the start. A chunk of that book takes place in San Francisco. It is very much about queer community and queer families and queer kind of generations and how the queer struggle is passed along from generation to generation. So you can buy that directly from Green Apple here in San Francisco, and I'll sign it and personalize it, and they ship everywhere. Thank you so much. Yay.
Thank you, thank you. And all the links are in the chat, so there's an embarrassment of resources there. But again, this is I should say this is a recorded webinar, so you can refer to the links. Or if not, just drop me an email. And in our last few minutes, open it up to the audience again. If you have any questions, we've got some lovely comments of appreciation in the chat already, so thank you. And while we're waiting to see if there's any of those, where can we find you? Do you want us to find you? Are there websites? Are there social media accounts? Are there You Shall Know Me by My Works? Please tell us where we can find more of your brilliance out there in the world.
You can find me at izzywasserstein.com. I'm also on Blue Sky at it's IZZYXEN. And I theoretically am also on Instagram, but I don't know how much longer that's going to be true because Zuckerberg keeps trying to ruin all the things even more. So yeah, Blue Sky or my website, there's a contact form there. I love to hear from folks too.
My newsletter is at buttondown.email/Charlie Jane.
It's a really good newsletter too. If you're waffling, get on the newsletter. You can find me at my website, Eboni, EBONI. I know that's shocking. Dunbar, DUNBAR. Oh, I don't know my name. Hi. .com. Or you can find me on Blue Sky at the same thing. Don't ask me to spell it again. And I am technically on Instagram, but you can get all the links and stuff from my website. I too have a newsletter. It's not as good as Charlie Jane's, so do Charlie Jane's. And then if you have some time and just want a little more in your inbox, you can also sign up for mine.
Wait, where's your newsletter? How do we get your newsletter?
The link is on the website. So that's what, if you go to the website, it leads you to all the other things.
My website is brentclambert.com, so you can find me there. Blue Sky, same username. I try to keep my usernames all the same consistently. So I was really proud when I was on Tananarive Dude's podcast, and like she was like, "That is so smart. I wish more people would do that." I'm like, if Professor Dude's giving me a compliment, I'm holding to this strategy for the rest of my life now. Anyway, so yeah, BrentCLambert.com, Brent C. Lambert at Blue Sky. On Blue Sky, I'm pretty much just throwing book recommendations at you like 90% of the time. So if you like want to know what I like to read, just hop on there. And I also am part of a podcast called Just Keep Writing. If you kind of like ever want to hear me get a little more in depth about anything, I guess that would be the place to do so. And I too have Instagram, but Lord knows, I don't know. We just won't recommend that.
I love that podcast. Just Keep Writing. It's such a wonderful podcast. It's so great. Y'all should definitely listen.
Definitely. Well, thank you all so much for taking the time this afternoon to share your experience, your wisdom, your brilliance. We've really appreciated it. And speaking of Professor Du, I see our keynote speakers in the attendees list. So we'll stop there. I'll do my webinar shenanigans, move you all to attendees, and then please do rejoin us at 3:30 for our keynote from Stephen Barnes and Tananarive Du. So thank you all again so much. Have a great rest of your day. Stay safe, and we'll be back real soon.